All right, welcome everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're based. Welcome to our Geneva online impact talk on how to avoid SDG washing, public-private partnerships for impact. We are very pleased to welcome to tonight two excellent speakers, former Prime Minister Peter Balkenende and our colleague from the European Investment Bank, Elina Kamitsana. So I'm really happy to have both of you here for this talk. Just before we start, some housekeeping rules. This webinar, for those of you who have been already with us before, is being recorded. So if you don't want to be seen on the recording, then please turn off your camera. Our webinar will, as usually, be published on YouTube, so you have a chance to review the recording afterwards and share it maybe in your network as well. Chiara will share the address in the chat box with you. And then last housekeeping rule: please do mute yourself while you're not talking, especially for those in the Q&A. Obviously, you will have the chance to unmute yourself during our discussion round. So just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Eckhard Ernst. I'm co-founder and president of Geneva Microlabs, and I will be moderating tonight this impact talk. And together with Renate Günther, our vice president from Geneva Microlabs, she will be handling the Q&A later on. So we are both very well looking forward to this exciting discussion with all of you. And as usual, I mean, please feel free to already share your questions while you're listening to our two speakers, as this will be, we were obviously hoping to have an as interactive discussion as possible, as usual. So let me introduce the two speakers to you more formally. Sorry, we first go to the agenda, exactly. So we have basically, for those of you who have seen the online talks already, we try to make it as interactive as possible. And so what we ask our speakers to bring to the discussion table first is like these three main questions. Do we really embrace the SDGs? How can we strengthen public-private cooperation? And how can the SDGs be better implemented? And so we ask our speakers to basically address these three questions. And then after each one of the questions, you will have the chance to interact with them in the Q&A. Okay, let's introduce our speakers. First is Elina Kamitsana, who is working with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Sorry, she started her career and banking career in the Nordea Group in risk management. Later on in international banking, she joined the financial institutions team of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in London in 2001 and built a track record in business origination, structuring, and execution of financing transactions, ranging from senior debt to equity in various countries of EBRD's operation. Then now Elina moved to Luxembourg and to the European Investment Bank in 2006 and has since held several roles at the EIB. Before taking up her role as head of the newly created Climate Office in the bank's Operation Directorate. In the beginning of 2020, she led EIB's corporate lending team covering 11 markets in Central and Northern Europe. So welcome, Elina, and great to have you tonight in the call.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Our second speaker is Professor Peter Balkenende, who was Prime Minister of the Netherlands from 2002 to 2010. And then during 2011 to 16, Peter worked as a partner at Ernst & Young on corporate responsibility and international affairs. Since 2016, he is external senior advisor to Ernst & Young, and since 2019, member of the World Leadership Alliance Club de Madrid. Currently, Peter chairs the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition, the Major Alliance, and the Noorber Foundation. And he's also professor of governance, institutions, and internationalization at Erasmus University Rotterdam. And maybe just for the little anecdote on Peter, when he was prime minister, I actually had the pleasure to be at the OECD, and we were very much looking into all the activities that the Netherlands undertook at the time to to implement climate or green policies, if you want. The one thing that the Netherlands did not want to take up from the OECD's recommendation was road pricing, which at the time created a bit of a polemic. And so I'm curious to maybe also in the discussion later on to see to what extent, what are the kind of policies that are uncontroversial and where are the roadblocks in the sense to some of these policies and some of the implementation of these policies. So Jan Peter, welcome as well to our discussion tonight.
Thank you very much.
So let's move straight on into the first block of questions, which just to remind you was, do we really embrace the SDGs? And so the first question actually is for you, Jan Peter, is this one. Are businesses, universities, NGOs, and governments really willing to rethink their positions? How to avoid green and SDG washing, and how can we address these problems, these roadblocks, as I said before?
Thank you, Eckhart, for this very clear question. It's an honor to be with you, so thanks for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to have a nice discussion with everyone. You raised the question. Let me make 3 remarks. The first is about the general story around SDGs. I think this is a set of very inspiring goals. This really can unite countries, people, universities, businesses, and NGOs. And I'm happy with this type of approach because this can really have a huge significance. So for me, the SDGs are really great. It's about leaving no one behind. It's about a better future for people now and tomorrow, and it's about taking care for our planet. So I think this is an excellent agenda, but that requires action. And that brings me to my second remark. If you talk about SDGs, I think this is, in fact, part of a much broader agenda. You cannot separate, of course, the SDGs from climate change, the circular economy, combating inequality. And I think this global agenda is essential. And in many places in the world, you can see things are changing and people try to be in line with this global agenda. This global agenda is connected with another discussion about which type of economy do you want to have. That's the discussion about which type of capitalism. You've seen during the last World Economic Forum session, it was about stakeholder capitalism. We have a discussion about conscious capitalism, moral capitalism, progressive capitalism. Something is changing. And of course, there are different approaches, but in fact, it's always about more long-term thinking. It's about having the right connections with social and economic dimensions, and it's about a stakeholder approach, not only the shareholder, a stakeholder approach, and that's what you can see. And the discussion regarding the global agenda, the type of capitalism is of course connected with what's the view on business models. So you can see that the traditional story of Milton Friedman, the business of business, is in fact over. It's now more about creating shared value. And this brings me to my third remark. If you talk about the SDGs, the question is, what does it really mean for governments, businesses, NGOs, and universities? Because it's not so difficult to say, yes, I support SDGs, but the question is, what is really happening? Are you willing to rethink and redesign? If a government is saying, yes, we are in line with SDGs, but you cannot see the differences in policy making, then something is going wrong. If universities are saying, and I see beautiful examples in my country, in the Netherlands, if you want to be in line with SDGs, but if it would not lead to changes of the research programs on the one hand and the educational programs on the other hand, what's the use of it? What I've seen in my country is that for all the University of Applied Sciences, they have integrated SDGs into their curricula. It's beautiful, but it requires really action. If you talk about the NGOs, if NGOs would say, well, we are acting in line with what we've done always. No, the question is, are you willing to talk with others? And what does it really mean? And when we talk about businesses, in my country, and it counts for many countries and many companies, you see that there are many references to the SDGs. But the question is, what does it mean for your key performance indicators? What about the policy? What about the way of reporting? How are you really working with the criteria of ESG, environment, social, and governance? So I think these elements are key. Rethinking, redesigning, and talk about what are your key activities and can you clarify what the changes are? And that's connected to my last remark. That has to do, of course, with the issue of greenwashing and SDG washing. It's not so difficult to have beautiful stories. But a key question will be, what do we concretely see? What are the changes? So if you talk about implementing the SDGs, it's a matter of honesty and transparency and integrity. I would like to underline these words because if you want to act in a serious way, then you must have a great story to tell. That's one. The second point, I think if you are not taking up the right positions, and if you are, in fact, not acting in line with the SDGs, it can lead to reputational risks. And that's good, because if you have a nice story to tell, but the story is not okay, then you get difficulties. You have reputational damage. And the third one is, and that is, I think this is a very important element, I'm underlining the SDGs, and that has to do with ethical reasons. What about our planet? What about climate change and so on? But it's also about what is beneficial regarding economic developments. And I think if you are taking up the responsibility regarding SDGs and circular economy and doing the right things for climate change, it has also huge economic consequences. I have the conviction that if you're not in line with the SDGs in the longer run, you will be the loser. So these are some of my general remarks on the first question. And I think I'm listening now to Elina. That's the next one, I suppose.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Jan-Peter. And I think this is a great introduction for Elina as well, and especially the question of how do we move from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism. So the question I have for you, Elina, is what about the financial industry and its role? Is the mainstreaming of green and sustainability in the investment decision really gaining momentum? And what's the EIB's direction of travel in this regard?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would like to start, nevertheless, by saying that it's my great pleasure to be here today and share my views with this audience and sit on the table with Jan-Peter, which is a great honor as well. So I think what Jan-Peter said is a good introduction. What I thought, what I will say now. Yes, I as Jan-Peter said, I think we all are converging and can sort of get behind the SDG agenda. I think the vision is the globally we can embrace the vision, but then again, how are we turning this vision to real action? And then coming to the financial sector, you asked, is the financial industry embracing SDGs? I think we can argue that mainstreaming SDGs is on its way. The train has left the station. We can observe that there are multiple pressures from different directions on the financial industry to incorporate climate and wider sustainability considerations into their operational policies and strategies, as well as in their business paradigms. Here, I would maybe make two further points. First, I think one can say that what gets regulated and reported also often gets managed. And hence, the increasing regulatory pressure and emphasis on topics such as climate risk, compliance, good governance, and social responsibility is making mark when it comes to financial industry. We see the front runners gearing to align their operations with Paris Agreement, for example, and rapidly building capacities to adapt to emerging EU taxonomy in the green space. We also have seen the financial industry fortifying their governance and compliance capacities in the past years as a response to regulatory pressures on that side. And hopefully we will see similar direction or similar movements also with regards to the other areas of the link to the SDGs. Secondly, I also believe that the financial sector is increasingly recognizing that sustainability also makes business sense. As Jan-Peter said, while it's about moral responsibility to get businesses and investors to move, there must be a business rationale. But again, the financial sector is recognizing that sustainability indeed makes business sense. The demand for financial products supporting sustainable economic activity, including green investment, for example, has been increasing quite exponentially in the past period. And since the EIB issued the first ever green bond in 2007, we have witnessed a very, very robust and significant growth in this market segment in particular. And now there are indications that alongside the green bonds, we will be seeing financial instruments also addressing the social dimension. And I think while the demand for amongst the investors is increasing, I think it's also evident that entities who are not embracing sustainability and putting it at the core of their business paradigm and are considered to be engaged in unsustainable activities are starting to face difficulty in raising funding in favorable terms and may encounter constraints when it comes to their investor base. So I think those are indications that the financial sector is indeed embracing the mainstreaming sustainability with an increasing speed. And maybe then just coming back to what you said about what you asked about EIB. I would say we have been in many ways pioneering the integration of sustainability into our operational framework. On one hand, climate and sustainability considerations, as well as governance and compliance, are very much part of our due diligence process, and does influence or has been for a long time already influencing our business decision making. We are working to further enhance existing tools and policies when it comes to climate risk tracking and reporting. And we are now aligning all our financial activities with the principles of the Paris Agreement, and in line with our low carbon framework that we published as part of our Climate Bank Roadmap in 2019. We are also embracing the EU taxonomy and the do no significant harm principle. We are also currently updating our minimum environmental and social standards, and we expect all our counterparts to adhere to. Importantly, I think it is to mention that we are actively developing our products and services and financing offer to promote investment that is conducive not only to climate or green investment, but also SDGs in the wider context. While we have said that 50% of our funding will go to green projects by 2025 and then beyond, we are also increasingly trying to ensure that our projects, green or otherwise, will make also positive contribution to the social dimension. For example, we have published our gender action plan that indeed tries to ensure that gender equality is considered when we are financing projects, making positive contribution. So just as an example, I will stop there and move on.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Elina. I mean, and actually, I see that already questions are piling up, so I give it immediately to Renate to handle the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to give the floor to Charlotte first, and then to Patrick Flynn. You have questions for Jan, Peter, and Elina. Charlotte, would you like to go first and unmute yourself?
Thank you very much, and to you both, such brilliant points made, so thank you already. What I would like to do is just come back to the points made by Jan Peter. I think there's so many things I absolutely agree with. The question of what type of capitalism do we want? What type of business models does that mean in the future? The shift from shareholder focus to stakeholder focus and creating of shared value. I'm a huge supporter of the B Corp movement, which I'm sure you've heard of if you've mentioned all of those things. And I have the pleasure of supporting businesses through that. And one of the things that we do is look at these impact business models. So my question is, how can governments and policymakers look to encourage and incentivize those type of businesses and those type of business models so that we see more of them in the future?
Charlotte, it's a great question and very relevant. How can the government support this type of business model? That's your question. I think there are several instruments you can use. Let's start with the element of how companies should report about their activities. You can support the process of integrated reporting. Of course, there are legal requirements, but if you are stimulating, encouraging companies to report, that helps in any case, then you have to be aware of what's happening. That's one. The second point, you have the role of the government as a launching customer. You can also work in that way. The third element is you never should act alone as a government. There are so many possibilities to work together. I will give the next question, I will tell more about it, but there are so many possibilities to work together as a government. Traditionally, when I studied law and history, and also parts of economics and political science. When I studied law, and that was in the 70s and the beginning of the 80s, that was in fact the time we expected everything from the government and how to cope with issues, regulation, planning, financing. But we discovered you can also expect too much from the government. In fact, you must have a balance between government, the market, and civil society. It's about having the right balance. You have to be aware of this balance. And I think this is really key. The government can do a lot of things, but also, and as a last remark, a government can be very inspiring. If a government is telling we want to be in line with SDGs and we understand SDG number 17, partnerships, then you create an atmosphere that makes it possible to work together. I think these are different instruments you can use as a government.
Yeah, brilliant points, and I absolutely agree that it needs to come from all sides as well. I just hope going forward that more of a platform and more awareness is raised about the businesses out there already doing this to encourage more to do it. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much.
I wish you a lot of success with your activities.
Thanks.
Thank you. Patrick, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your questions for Emilia?
Sure. Hi, thanks for the presentation and some very interesting points for everyone. To Alina, I agree with you about what gets measured gets done. And my question is around within climate change, companies are getting focused, or there's consensus building for temperature measurement as a way of scoring companies. With regard to like the other sustainability development goals that aren't climate focused, how do you see a measurement scale coming together? And I guess we want to prevent companies just labeling themselves as SDG and not actually, they're not actually compliant. Thanks.
That is a very good question. And as you rightly pointed out, I think in the climate space, we have made some progress with regards to measurement and standardization, which I think is indeed key to avoid greenwashing and sort of create a common language and understanding what we are talking about when we talk about green activities and sustainable activities. I don't have a panacea for your question in a way, and I think when it comes to the other SDGs, it is more complicated because unlike in climate, where we do have science-based evidence and we can maybe set science-based targets, it may be more complicated in other areas. it's more subjective. But I think there are attempts in a way to bring transparency and create common language. And I think that work needs to continue. I think while we are contemplating on standardization, I think nevertheless more we are able to track and trace and be transparent about what we are talking about, even if we don't necessarily have a common rules yet to measure per se, but at least we would understand what different entities and actors are calling sustainable, and we will at least be able to make judgments. And as we do see already the improvement of the quality of sustainability reporting, for example, that makes it more evident for the reader and for the audience and stakeholders to understand what these entities are actually calling sustainable, allowing them at least to make their own judgment, qualitative assessment, whether they consider this to be enough or just window dressing.
Thank you, Nina. And back to you, Eckhard, for the next questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks to both speakers. And I just wanted to highlight, because we have quite a number of questions in the Q&A. If you both feel that you want to directly answer them in the chat box, please feel free to do so. I mean, we won't have, unfortunately, the time to answer all of them in the open discussion. So, okay, we talked a lot about the overall framework. I think we want to go a bit closer now into the discussion about how can we strengthen public-private cooperation, and especially, Lina, I had a question for you in this, because you talk a lot about what the IAB is doing in this entire area about SDGs and developing new forms of impact financing. But can you give us maybe one or two examples of how IAB is going about bridging private and public?
Right. With pleasure. I would nevertheless start by saying that, in fact, if you think about EIB, we are an institution that is, in a way, in a gray zone, if you may, or twilight zone between the public and private. We are a publicly owned financial institution that relies on the EU level policies and priorities for the operational direction of travel. On the other hand, we are a bank, and we do adhere to sound banking principles and best banking practices. Hence, we are, I think, combining the two, we are rather well placed to bridge the public and private, as we somehow claim to understand the both sides. Then about the practicalities, so to speak. EIB has a principle that we always provide financing alongside with other investors. Based on our statutes, we typically would not finance more than 50% of the costs associated with the investments we are supporting. That being said, one of our key objectives, in fact, is to crowd in additional capital to support sustainable projects and undertakings. While the public sector, of course, will remain as one of the key promoters of green and sustainable investment, we do see that the private sector's role will be increasing, and the private sector will need to play a pivotal role in the green and sustainable space if we want to achieve our SDG goals and climate goals that we have set to ourselves. For example, in EU, without the very strong private sector engagement, I don't think we will be able to reach the net zero target. And that in mind, indeed, we are we want to be the complementary investor that brings value added to the borrowers and promoters, and sort of allows them to improve their capital structure and the financing structure of their investments in a way that the other investors, the private investors, other stakeholders are comfortable to engage and encouraged to engage to these endeavors. In that space, I would like to maybe lastly point out that in order to improve our catalytic impact, be it then financial or through our technical expertise, we are deploying and developing financial instruments that are leveraging on public funding, in particular EU budgetary resources for the benefit of our clients. This public funding that we leverage allows us typically to increase our risk-taking capacity, which in turn gives us an opportunity to provide provide financial instruments to projects that may be considered high risk, but with our intervention would then be able to, the promoters would be able to improve the risk profile of these ventures, so that also the private capital is more comfortable of engaging. And these type of solutions we will continue deploying in the green space and also in other SDG areas and projects relevant in this context. So it's the EIB financing. We as Catalyst, as a public financial institution, providing funding and advisory alongside other investors, giving comfort to private capital to engage, but also that through sort of risk sharing capacity that we have, we aim to catalyze more private investment in for the benefit of sustainable ventures.
Excellent, thank you very much. I mean, that's really clear, and I think what's really interesting, you pointed out to the importance of supporting or creating political will behind it. So I think that's a great point for Jan Peter maybe to answer. And one question I have in this regard is, what's the meaning of initiatives like the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition, and what do you see as the key challenges for public-private cooperation?
Eckhard, thanks for your question. Again, 3 remarks. First, about Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition. We started our initiative in 2011. It was an element of working together with 8 Dutch multinationals. And all those companies said, we want to integrate fully the sustainability into business model. So the question was, what can we learn from each other? What about business model, sustainable growth business models? How can we develop them? How can you implement these models in your own organization? Also raising the questions, how can we as companies contribute to the SDGs, to climate change, to circular economy? And recently we had a report on the circular economy for plastics. We had a pilot on biofuels and shipping. We have contact with the Dutch government. We work together with others. I think it's really helpful if you have such an organization. You can publish reports, you can organize conference, you can talk with others, you can talk with the Dutch government. And our CEOs are very active in the framework of the United Nations, the OECD, World Economic Forum, and so on. Another example, a few months ago, we said, let's publish a green recovery business statement. And what was the idea behind it? If you are stimulating the economy in times of Corona, lay directly a connection with the Green Deal on European scale and with issues around SDGs and climate change and so on. So that was an attempt of us to have the right discussion. And then we said, this should not something be alone of the DSGC. Let's make it an initiative of DSGC, CSR Netherlands, that's an organization of more for the SMEs, Global Compact Netherlands, the Dutch Banking Association, and the Dutch Employees Association. And the funny thing was that within a few weeks' time, 400 companies and organizations supported this idea. So that was really, I think, huge significance. You can work together, and it's really helpful. In the Netherlands, we used to have these public-private arrangements. For example, during the last years, we had a climate agreement and an energy agreement. And these agreements are, in fact, agreements between the government, businesses, universities, cities, and so on. And it's a bit part of our tradition in the Netherlands. We know we have to work together, but it's helpful if you have a kind of commitment from different sides. And my second remark, that has to do with the international scale. I'm happy we have a UN Global Compact. I'm always following the discussions that are being held in the World Economic Forum. We have the OECD. And let me give some recent examples. It was last week, I took part in a discussion. It was organized by Temasek, a big investment company in Singapore. And it was about climate action. It was fascinating to have dialogues with people from the US, from India, from China, Singapore, myself from Europe. And it was great to have such a discussion about how can we make progress and what can we learn from each other. A few weeks before that, I had a meeting with 20 CEOs in Japan, and the Minister for the Environment was there, and it was about the circular economy. And also the question was, what can we learn from each other, Japan and the Netherlands? There are so many possibilities to work together. And 2 days ago, I had a meeting with a Canadian Director General and the Dutch Minister for the Environment about the circular economy. I'm convinced that we need public-private partner cooperations, and it is possible. And that brings me to my last remark. What are the challenges? Because it's always nice to say, yeah, let's work together. But the question is, of course, what are we really doing? What are our concrete actions? How can we perform in a better way? What about the timetables you are using? What about the measurement of the impact of all those arrangements? So this is really key. And therefore, it's good to underline the fact that you must have also a value chain approach. It's not only one company talk about whole value chain. Also talk about the role of sectors. For example, if you talk about the circularity and in the textile sector, it's so important that people are working together. And you have cross-sectoral cooperation. And then they have, of course, the issue of the level playing field. A lot of companies are saying, we want to do more, but our competitors. So you have to change the landscape. So I think if you want to make a success of the SDGs, of climate change, circular economy, we really need PPS constructions. But it's a matter of how specific are you? What are the concrete actions? What about the timetables? And if you are, let's say, working together in the right way, then we can be very successful. And that gives hope to the future. In fact, there's not an alternative.
Thank you. I immediately hand over to Renate for the Q&A.
Thank you, Eckhard. Yeah, Jürgen Bartel, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question for Elina?
Yeah, first of all, thanks, Jan Peter, because that's actually so fitting. It's we're talking a lot, and there was actually a joke about van der Leyen recently saying, we make the big plans, but the others are faster, and we really recognize that a lot. An example is that the Norsk e-fuel synth kerosene facility is now in Norway. It's not in Europe, and it's a German company's joint venture. It's kind of weird why they had to go to Norway, because they didn't get it done in Europe. It's Norway's only a partner. It's not the EU. My question was for Elena is how do you consider the SDGs? How do you qualify, disqualify from lip services? So can you quantify and possibly not now, but share numbers on the SDGs? EIB investments had what impact in the past? You say you do it since 2007, so there must be numbers that you can share, saying, okay, we did those investments, and this is how the SDGs have been impacted. And I don't find those numbers on the EIB. I find a lot of nice wordings, but I don't find any facts that say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what we improved. This is what we changed. This is what we're going to change. And yes, it's future thinking, because the SDGs are goals. They're not like, I can guarantee you those goals, but you do your best efforts to achieve them, and some are over and some are underperforming. Which of them did overperform and why, and which underperformed and why, and what can we learn of that? Because that's the development process. I think Jan Peter just recently spoke about it, saying, okay, where do we learn from each other? We have to exchange that know-how and learn to avoid mistakes and to qualify and disqualify, as this meeting today is about. How can we avoid the SDG greenwashing?
Right. Yes, I think you will not necessarily indeed find the numbers in a form that you would like to have them. I think in terms of climate, there probably when it comes to tracking, tracing, and impact, we are more advanced in terms of reporting and numbers in that sense. In terms of the other SDGs, we do, of course, when we finance for individual projects, we look at the projects and their contributions to our specific policy goals, and provide our stakeholders data and information on that. But indeed, in terms of reporting within the SDG framework, that is something that we don't currently do. We report on basis of our own policy goals, and then on project to project basis, we provide data on these specific contributions to the policy objectives that we have. But as I said, as part of the Climate Bank roadmap and our further endeavor to improve our first of all our project and impact assessment framework and reporting framework, we are working on these themes, and hopefully going forward we can do better in this area.
Thank you, Elina. And now back to you, Eckhard.
Please do that. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. And I think you raised a very important point, which is to say, like, how can we actually measure these targets better, so that we actually have a better track record of how to implement the SDGs. And I think that's exactly what brings us to the last block of questions. And I start with Jan-Peter again, exactly on that point. How can we better measure tools that contribute to SDG implementation, and should these tools become obligatory, or should we keep them voluntary?
Yeah, but first let me make a remark about Jürgen, because you spoke about Norway. I love Norway, and I'll explain why. In 2016, I was the leader of a Dutch delegation. We attended Washington because of the US presidential elections. And so we spoke with congressmen and people from think tanks and journalists and so on. But also we attended the polling stations just to see how is voting over there. And then there was the chairperson of that polling station. We are so honored. We have a delegation from abroad. We have the former Prince of Norway. So that I will never forget it. So since then, constantly the Dutch said, the former Prince of Norway. So, and again, you talk about Norway. So thanks for bringing up this beautiful country. Then, Eckhard, your question. What about measurement? In 2010, I had a meeting with Joseph Stiglitz. It was an honor for me, the Nobel Prize winner. And it was about the question, how can we measure the GDP? And he said, we're not measuring in the right way. And I think he is right. We are sometimes excluding important elements regarding sustainability, for example. Then we talked about the Millennium Development Goals. Then we said, are we on track? So the issue of measurement was extremely important. 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement. I'm so happy that there was an agreement about the fact that countries must report every 5 years about their attempts to reduce the CO2 emissions. So it's a matter of measurement. If you talk about the circular economy, show what's it all about. Listen to Ellen MacArthur, for example. Companies, you have integrated reporting and you have the ESG criteria. So I think the issue of measurement is really key. And that brings me to my second remark about SDGs. The SDGs are great, but you have to ask yourself always the question, are we on track? Are we making progress enough or not? So the issue of measurement is really key. It is about statistics, and you have beautiful examples. In my country, for example, we have Statistics Netherlands, and they're developing tools how to measure the implementation of the SDGs. You know, the Bertelsmann Foundation in Germany, the Bertelsmann Stiftung, they are comparing countries and their achievements regarding the SDGs. And we have an organization in the Netherlands called Max, and that's about, they have developed a tool how to measure the implementation of the SDGs within your own organization. So the element of measurement is really key. And that brings me to a remark Elina made. She made fantastic remarks about the financial sector. but you can see sometimes that there is a gap between the intentions. You see a lot of central banks. They are busy with sustainability. They talk about how can you contribute to a better world. But I'm also, as a supervisory board member of ING, what I also notice is that when we talk about the quarterly reporting activities of banks, how are they measured? It's a matter of how is it with their growth? What about the profits? What about return on equity? So in fact, there's a focus on short-term results. And at the same moment, you should have better tools to measure the societal aspects of doing business. That counts for the financial sector, counts for others as well. Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, he said, when he started as the CEO of Unilever, I stopped with quarterly reporting because there's too much focus on the short-termism. And that was the reason why he said, I report every 6 months instead of the 3 months, just to have more room for long-term orientation. And then the last remark has to do with the fact, should be voluntary or obligatory. Let me give my preference, of course, is it is always better if it can be done on a voluntary basis. And why? Because if it's voluntary, then it's a matter of conviction. It's about your own views. It's about your own orientation. And there are a lot of examples now, universities, governments, businesses, they are willing to change. They want to be in line with the SDGs, even without obligations. So I prefer the voluntary approach. Is that enough? I do not think so. You also need obligatory elements. If you talk about integrated reporting, I'm happy with the director of the European Union saying you have to report and it's a comply or explain rule. Well, or you are in line with the directive, and if you are not willing to report, then you have to explain. I think not explaining is more difficult than saying what's happening. This has to do with honesty. Let me give a Dutch example, DSM, a chemical company. And DSM, they have the annual report, and also it contains one paragraph about what went wrong. I think this is a symbol of strength. That means you are in control, you know what's happening. And if you talk about measurement, it is a matter of honesty. And I think we can realize goals, but it's a matter of having the right targets, the timetables, and you must have the willingness to report. So the preference is, of course, voluntary, but also you need sometimes obligatory elements.
Excellent, thank you very much. And I think I couldn't agree more. Actually, at Geneva Microlabs, we are also kind of currently putting together some effort in this direction, kind of finding a proper way of measuring the achievements and the targets. So my last question is actually for Elina, and which basically builds up on what Peter was saying. It's like, what other actions do we need to take in order to increase investment around and investment conducive to SDGs?
I think Jan-Peter already made quite a few of those points that I was planning to make. So I think my answer would also center on development of measure. How do we measure and how we increase the transparency around the results. There are, as Jan-Peter also highlighted, there are already very positive developments to this direction. But what I think we also need is a certain the standardization, because as we know, when we are compared with each other with the same yardstick, that often motivates us to improve. So I think it's about right measuring tools, but it's also about agreement on certain standards and how we are compared to each other, so that we are comparing and assessing apples with apples and not apples with peers. I also would like to make a remark that builds on what Jan-Peter said about the short and long-term perspective, in particular when it comes to companies. And I do agree with him, but I would also like to say that I do believe that the sustainability considerations are more and more also influencing the financial hard results, and the companies are starting to realize that. I recently stumbled on an example of a Nordic pulp and paper company that after some mishaps with regards to their performance related to SDGs, decided to put sustainability at the core of their business paradigm, because they saw that if they do fail, be it then on climate, that climate risks are realized, or be it then that they fail to respect, let's say, human rights or equal rights, and this is picked up, it does have can have a very significant impact on their financial performance. So what I'm saying is that I don't think that these two dimensions are really converging, and I think that is actually the key, that this kind of realization will happen more and more, that in fact the putting sustainability at the core of the business paradigm makes business sense, and it's also about the creating that stakeholder but also shareholder value. Without you embracing the sustainability, you potentially in the longer run are eroding the shareholder value, and things can go horribly wrong. We have seen that happening, for example, when you fail with compliance or governance, but also when it comes to managing climate risk or some of the social risks associated to your business. So that was just a bit of a side remark as well, building on what Jan Peter said. I would really like to maybe mention one additional point that we haven't really discussed, which is capacity building. What we see and awareness raising. I think there is still some mileage to go in that respect. As a bank, we recognize that there is huge need for investment only in the climate space. In order to get to this net zero in Europe, we have to invest over 360 billion only in the energy transition more annually in order to reach these goals and to reach the 2030 climate goals, for example. So. But we don't see these investments not necessarily happening. And it's not only that the actors are not willing to invest, it is also that the capacity to actually embrace climate and sustainability as part of the business paradigm and investment strategies. So we need to build capacity, and we need to support organizations, companies, financial sector in building these capacities and raise awareness, because otherwise while we do put ourselves behind the agenda, if we don't actually know what we are supposed to be doing or how we are going to do it, it will be difficult to advance. So I really think we need to be more mindful of the fact that we need more capacity building and advisory work in the SDG space in order to advance and really move and direct more capital to sustainable investment.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Renata, over to you.
Thank you, Eckart. So we have 4 minutes to go, and we would like to give the floor to for one more question. And I'd like to ask Johanna to speak out.
Thank you very much. And I have a question that it's a very much in point what you just said, Alina, although my question will go to both of you, to you and to Jan-Peter. But I wanted to ask on the last words you say regarding capacity building, and I'm in London and working precisely on that with the European Union. So very happy to help. And I wonder what are the routes that you're taking on capacity building? But my question to you both is if you can name one specific initiative that is doing well in progressing the SDGs that could be replicated globally. Thank you.
Shall I maybe start?
Please, yes, go ahead.
Okay. First to say that generally the EIB is offering advisory and technical assistance in various areas relevant to SDGs, climate advisory including. And maybe I'll as for the example, maybe I'll mention an interesting capacity building quest that we have in us also linked with to the European with the European Commission, or with the support of the European Commission, which is the natural capital facility that provides financing, but also through which we render technical assistance and advisory in the area of nature-based solutions. And we have quite successfully actually combined that offer with our own financing offer in number of cities, for example, that are promoting projects where the project makeup and can be enhanced with the element of natural-based solutions, and I think that's an area where, for example, we can make really a difference.
Thank you. Jan-Peter, what's your point? Yeah. What's your view on that?
Yeah, thanks, Johanna. Good to see you again, and thanks for your question. You asked for inspiring examples. Let me mention two. I would like to underline the word reinventing. Everything is changing, so the question is, how can you redesign, how can you reinvent? And a beautiful example is the Dutch Philips company. Traditionally, they made bulbs, radios, televisions. They made a complete shift, and now it's all about medical equipment. That's a change of activities. But even more importantly, they really have chosen for a circular economy approach. For example, in earlier days, they sold bulbs. Now they sell light as a service. That means that the company stays the owner of the equipment and is reusing materials when the equipment's at the end of the life cycle. This is a beautiful example, and this approach they are also using it now for the medical equipment. I think this is a beautiful example of reinventing. That's one. And the second example, already said it, I'm so enthusiastic about the Dutch University of Applied Sciences. They all have said we should integrate the SDGs into our curricula. And I've had many meetings with the students, and they learn about SDGs, and they also required to develop a product or a service that is in line with SDGs. I've seen so much creativity. You can use these tools everywhere in the world. So I think there are so many good examples. Do it.
Thank you, Jan-Peter. Eckhart, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think I take that as your 30-second statement, the do it part. I mean, that's an excellent conclusion. So thank you very much for all your very active participation. What I would suggest, because we really didn't have time to go through all the questions, that we will post them underneath our YouTube video recording when it's done. And then if our two speakers would want to kind of connect to that and see whether they want to answer some of these questions, please do so. I think these are excellent questions, and I really regret that we didn't have more time to just discuss that. I want to make two more remarks. One is, first of all, an announcement about our next event. So one is the next online talk, Geneva Macrolabs online talk on the 28th of April, which will be on managing work in the digital economy, where we will be discussing with some authors of a recently released book with the same title on future of work related issues, and we were looking more specifically into how these next 10 years might pan out in different parts of the world, and how we see this shifting challenges, if you want, both related obviously to the current pandemic, but also to longer term relations to automation, demographic changes, and how this will pan out in the next 10 years. So we're looking forward. We have Sabina Devan, the executive director of the Just Jobs Network. We will have Daniel Saman from Geneva Microlabs, and we have a colleague from the International Labour Organization, Eric Ravel, who will be joining us for that talk on the 28th of April. And then on the 5th of May, we have another impact talk where we'll be basically presenting the results of our different focus groups. For those of you who have followed a bit what Geneva Impacts is doing, we are currently developing concrete impact project plans, and we will be discussing or presenting those on the 5th of May. And then one last remark is I'm proud to announce, and I see that both you're still there, that we have signed a collaboration now with UNITA, the United Nations Training and Assistance and Research Branch. So that's great to have you, Alina, as well. And I saw Philip was there as well before. And then we have another partnership that we just signed with Argao, which is a cryptocurrency company here based in, actually they're based in Zug, but we have contact here in Geneva, where we will be helping them to implement their cryptocurrency solutions for sustainable finance in some partner countries on the African continent. So with that, I wish you a very nice evening. Thank you very much for participating, for being so active. Thank you much to both of our speakers for an excellent talk. Great to have you both here. And I really look very much forward to having you all together here again in 2 weeks' time for our next online talk. And with that, have a nice evening. Thank you very much.
Have a nice evening,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Very much.
Thank you, Elina and Jan-Peter. Elina, have a nice evening. Thank you for your presentation. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Yes, indeed. It was really great talk. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for
Thank you,
joining us.
Elina. Fantastic. Thank you so much.